Good afternoon. It's 12 o'clock. I'm Bill O'Neill. The battle around a government funding plan centers around health care and access to Affordable Care Act tax credits. One Arizona congressman says the clock is ticking now to get a deal done.
The tax credits, which are used to lower premiums for those who get insurance through the ACA marketplace, are set to expire at the end of the year. Congressman Greg Stanton says people are already getting letters announcing their health care costs will double as open enrollment starts next month.
The average Arizonan, $780 more out of their own pocket starting next year. We cannot delay one more moment.
According to Stanton, nearly 90,000 Arizonans will lose their coverage if the tax credits expire. Republicans have said they're willing to negotiate an extension for the credits if Democrats help pass a continuing resolution to reopen the government. Stanton, though, says he's skeptical after the One Big Beautiful Bill cut funding for Medicaid. Colton Krolak, KTAR News.
Maricopa County residents will be voting on Prop 409 starting October 8th. If passed, the proposition would authorize the county to obtain nearly $900 million in bonds for Valleywise Health. Dr. Michael White with Valleywise Health joined Arizona's Morning News to discuss how the initiative would benefit the organization.
The largest project for this particular bond initiatives will be able to expand the number of behavioral health beds that we have within Valleywise Health to be able to meet this growing need.
He says the funds would only be authorized for infrastructure and facility improvements, cannot be used for hospital operations. Valleywise Health is owned by Maricopa County. Could the city of Peoria become the next Silicon Valley? Some local leaders hope so, in part due to now $7 billion in investment from chips maker Amcor. They plan to open a semiconductor fabrication center in Peoria in 2028. Governor Katie Hobbs says,
since moving their headquarters to Arizona in 2004, we have enjoyed great success together. Over 20 years of collaboration, innovation, and progress.
It's expected to create up to 3,000 jobs in all for the area. An event called Missing in Arizona being held on October 18th at Arizona State University's West Valley campus in Glendale as officials try to resolve some outstanding cases.
The Arizona Attorney General's office, along with Maricopa and Pinal County medical examiners' offices, will help gather information and things like DNA and fingerprints from families who have unresolved cases. Prior Missing in Arizona Day activities have brought resolution to nearly 50 families. Find out more information at KTAR.com. LaDonna Harvey, KTAR News.
Well, can the marketplace of ideas still work without violence or discord? Join us next for an important conversation on civil discourse in partnership with ABC15 and Arizona Talks. You'll hear from the experts and community leaders as they come together for this exclusive roundtable discussion right here at the KTAR YouTube channel or at the KTAR News app. Let's get a check on what's happening with those roads right now. Live from the Valley Chevy Dealers Traffic Center, here's John Roller.
All right, thank you very much, Bill, and good afternoon to you. We do have some slowing coming out of the downtown area, heading west on the I-10. Just prior to the stack, had an earlier crash there, and that means we've got stop and go slowing right at the stack as you come southbound to transition to the eastbound I-10. That'll stay with you to about 35th Avenue. Then you are good to go. That's it for the Valley main lines. If you're just heading out, you are good to go both in the West Valley and the East Valley. We are working a crash in Goodyear, Elliott Road, and the Estrella Parkway. Another crash involving a pedestrian 3rd Street in McDowell in the downtown area, and still have some leftover slowing from a crash with injuries 59th Avenue and Baseline Road. Traffic is brought to you by Red Mountain Weight Loss. Get real testosterone from real doctors now at Red Mountain. Boost your energy, your focus, and your sex drive. If you have low T, start for free this month only at redmountainweightloss.com. John Roller, KTAR News.
Lots of sunshine. 98s are high today. Clear tonight, down to 68. Mostly sunny tomorrow with a high of 97. Slight chance of rain on Thursday with a high of 97. Better chance of seeing some storms on Friday with a high of 94 degrees. For right now, we are seeing bright sunshine, blue skies out there. 89 degrees right now in Phoenix. Weather is brought to you by Howard Aaron Plumbing. Whether replace or repair, call Howard Aaron Plumbing. I'm Bill O'Neill on Arizona's news station, KTAR News.
KTAR News 92.3, the KTAR News app, KTAR on YouTube, a KTAR News special, The Right to Disagree, with Chris Merrill.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us for this very special report that we have, The Right to Disagree. It's a special roundtable discussion, and joining me and co-hosting today is ABC 15's Craig McKee. Craig, great to have you in the studio. It's the first time that we've had a chance to have you in the studio. I hope it's not the last.
No, I hope
very
so.
excited
It's
about this.
not so honored to be here. I'm excited about the next 2 hours here and jumping off this conversation.
So, in an era of polarization and political violence, what does it mean to protect the freedom to debate, dissent, and disagree, but, of course, in a civil manner? Joining us right now from Arizona Talks is Carlos Alfaro and Sybil Francis from the Center for the Future of Arizona. Greetings, gang. Thank you so much for being a part of this. I think the next 2 hours are going to be vital, and I think you'll also find they're going to go very, very quickly for us. Craig, if you don't mind, I'd like to go ahead and kick things off.
Absolutely.
Here. Very good. So, I was looking at a recent survey that was done by the New York Times. It says Americans are worried now that divisions cannot be overcome. 2/3 of voters say that America is too politically divided to solve its own problems. Sybil, let's start with you here, Center for the Future of Arizona. When you hear that stat, I mean, what thoughts go through your mind? Is there agreement? Is there disagreement? Is there alarm? How do you take that when you hear those numbers?
Well, absolutely. Arizonans and I think people across the country are concerned about polarization, political polarization, and there's no doubt that is very extreme. What we bring to the table at Center for the Future of Arizona is we've been listening to Arizonans, doing public opinion survey research for over 15 years. And what we found over and over, in fact, is that Arizonans agree on much more than we disagree on big, important issues. So it's very important, I think, as we recognize this political polarization, that if we step back, we see that there is a lot more agreement and things that people have in common. And I think it's just important to remember that, and I think it can bring a different framing and lens to these conversations.
Doesn't seem to be much emphasis on those things that we get along on now. I mean, for instance, nobody is running on the I Love Puppies platform. Is that fair to say? No one's out there saying, rainbows are pretty. I mean, we all agree on these things. Instead, we run on the things that divide us, don't we? Carlos?
Well, and I think that's the problem. It's the wrong focus. Yes, the controversy's there, but every single day at the legislature, over at a dinner table, or with friends in a bar, we're all engaging in civil discourse. And so that's why we formed our organization, is to highlight those moments where people are still strong in what they believe in, but they're willing to try to understand the other side. They're giving permission to the other person to hear what they have to say. And I think people are curious. You know, all of these people that are engaging in this discourse, they're curious about what their neighbor is thinking, who they're voting for, and then they want to engage in this. We've seen a massive rise in demand for people wanting to be next to each other. So people that are humble enough to know that you don't know everything, people that are, curious to want to hear from the other side. So I think there's a movement here that is not usually focused on.
But when you talk about the perception is different than what the data is showing you, because you're talking about all these similarities and everyone just trying to get through their daily life, let's say, or their work week. But the data and perception are two different things.
Absolutely. And, one interesting example and powerful example is immigration is certainly right up there as a very politically polarizing, controversial topic. Our data show that over 80% of Arizonans support comprehensive immigration reform with a pathway to citizenship. And when we say the data show, we have surveyed Arizonans across this state of every political affiliation, education level, income level. So when we say 82%, that is a very strong number. So that is a huge contrast with what we know is going on in the political sphere and dialogue.
So nobody runs on that, though. I mean, if 82% of the state agrees on this, it seems like that would be a slam dunk, that instead you would have politicians that would say, I'm listening to you, and this is what has to happen. But instead, it seems to be an issue that even though there's 82% agreement, is still as divisive as any other topic.
Well, I think candidates running for office are rewarded for partisan ideological views. We've heard of being primaried. Well, what being primaried means is you haven't spoken to the interests of your base. And the base is a very powerful constituency, but it doesn't necessarily represent the majority of people. So that's a lot of where this problem comes from.
I also want to point, there are candidates running on this. I don't know if you've seen recently Governor Cox in Utah has not only come out and been a leader in bringing people together and trying to unite us, but he has refused to do negative advertising for his opponent. In fact, he brought his opponent on the same ad, talking about how they want the state to be better even though they disagree. So I do think that there is a movement that is going to carry political success for people that tap into all of this agreement.
I would say, looking at that over years, and majority of people that we interview and speak to, they hate the mudslinging. They hate any of those ad campaigns. to me, that seems like a very big uphill battle to change the dynamic when all of the rhetoric, the messaging out there is very much on the attack level against the other side, one way or the other. So how do you change that? And also that goes directly, I think, into your data and that perception of what's going on here. And I can't speak to you on this topic because my base or the ad campaigns are saying that you're the evil dog in the playground.
I think it's action, right? If people engage in these conversations, you kind of see what is not being said in a lot of the media. And I'm so glad that there's a lot of work now, new projects and new work bringing and changing that narrative in the news and in our media today.
Well, and clearly media has a responsibility in this because we, as ABC15 and the journalists are out on the streets, we have to make sure we're shining the light on the facts. And it's really up to our viewers to take that information in and decide, obviously, how they want to ingest that information and work with it. But we have a responsibility to make sure we're telling the full story on both sides.
We'll get into more of the media ethics behind this in our next segment as we continue on with our Right to Disagree, a special roundtable discussion. Carlos Alfaro from Arizona Talks and Sybil Francis from the Center for the Future of Arizona. Carlos, I want to go back to what you were talking about in Utah. Spencer Cox setting an example, bringing his opponent on stage. That's wonderful. Utah's 90% Republican. There's no risk in doing that. Would we ever see Governor Hobbs bring David Schweikert or Andy Biggs on stage? And, I mean, are we supposed to read that, she's not doing what's right by Arizona? Because I got to tell you, in a state this purple, that feels like a big risk to give your opponent a spotlight. In Utah, there's no risk.
I agree. With risk and comes great success, too. I mean, I think that the reason why Arizona is looked at as so purple is because people do take these risks of maybe talking to the middle and expanding that independent side. So I do think that whoever takes it, whether it's Governor Hobbs or Schweikert or maybe another office, they're going to see good results from doing that.
All right. Our Right to Disagree, a special roundtable discussion, continues in just a few moments. A special thanks to Craig McKee for coming in from ABC 15 and helping me co-host this. I'm Chris Merrill. We'll continue with our guests, including what Craig was just talking about, the media disagreeables, the responsibility of media, because let's face it, Craig, I don't know about you, but I came to work today because I wanted a paycheck. And that means that we have to make sure we've got listeners, we've got viewers, we've got, doesn't matter what you're in, readers, clicks, whatever it is. Does that lead us down this path of sensationalism? Not for Craig, obviously. For me, definitely. Does that lead us down this path that may be more divisive than if we were to sit together and talk about more of, as Sybil put it, the 82% that might agree on one otherwise divisive topic? We'll continue with that because you want the truth. You don't necessarily want to fight over it, though, physically. That's next on our special presentation of the Right to Disagree on ABC 15 and KTAR News. Sybil Francis for the Center for the Future of Arizona. You heard Craig start talking about some of the media responsibility and what it is when you go out on the field and you find these facts and you present these facts, which, if I can just pay my colleague here a compliment, that's what makes local news so wonderful.
Absolutely.
Right? It's also why we see the national news kind of veering in a different direction. Granted, you might have your nightly newscasts on the networks, but for the most part, an awful lot of people are getting their news from those big cable outlets right now. I've always said that news is a business. There is certainly some integrity that goes into it, but none of us came to work today because we didn't want to feed our kids, right? I mean, that's important. Right now, conflict sells. Is there some way that media can more responsibly approach some of the topics that are divisive? And in some cases, I would say it's because of their own hosts that have amped up that rhetoric. Is there a way that they can self-correct without costing them in the ratings or in the revenue? Sybil, you want to jump on that one?
Sure, I'll jump in. First of all, I think what you started off with your comment saying that local news is so vital and important. And I think the closer the news is to the local communities and the concerns of those communities, the more fair and data-driven it is. And congratulations to both of you, because I do think that our local news in Arizona does very well in that regard, certainly compared to the national news. When we ask Arizonans what they think about the media, they always give the media terrible grades, but what they're really thinking about, I think, is the national media and social media. I think, one thing I've challenged some of the national folks that I know is to say, why is it not a scandal that the things that Arizonans, and I dare say Americans, want is not being delivered by our politics? I think that's a pretty interesting, hot story. Why is it that we have 82% of Arizonans, and I think that's probably true across the country, who want immigration reform and a pathway to citizenship? Why are we not getting that? So I think one thing is to ask really hard questions like that. And I also think that there are areas where people do agree, and it's important to be able to bring those out. And I think people are very tired of this polarization, and we're starting to see, even on some of the national outlets, I believe, a little bit moving away from some of this polarization, because 9 out of 10 Arizonans are tired of this polarization.
And obviously, I can only speak to local news. I've been in this business for 28 plus years. I know I don't look like a day over 30 years old, right? And I've seen the changes over time. But one thing that is consistent with local news is consistency in the fact that we tell both sides of the story, right? Our job is to tell what's going on in this community, whatever the subject matter is, get folks on both sides of the issue to make sure the story isn't one-sided, lay out the facts. If somebody pushes back on us and says, no, the term obviously that has become very popular, fake news, the facts you're presenting are not right, well, show me. Where are you getting your information? We live in a world now that is completely different, I think you can agree, from even the 1990s when newspapers or what have you, information traveled at a different speed. Right now, you can get a blue check mark on your account and look verified when you're not necessarily a legitimate news source. And there is so much information and disinformation being spread out there, and I think that plays a role in this as our responsibility as local news to take those bits of information, verify what we can, and make sure that to the best of our ability we're vetting that information that gets out there. When you're looking at the data, what are people telling you about where they're even pulling their information from?
Well, a lot of the people that come to Arizona Talks do it within their community, right? Friends, family. We were talking before the show about how most people just want to get their kids out of the house. They don't have the time to sit there and read and analyze policy. So I think it has to be education of what you were just talking about. Because media is so specialized now, there's so much different options. We need to re-educate on what is good media, what are the standards of saying what you're going to be saying. And I think media today, because of that change, it plays that role of educating even the influencer on Instagram.
Well, the echo chamber obviously is a huge component of this as well, because there are people who go to look for information, but if they surround themselves and only follow accounts that kind of feed into what they believe in, that becomes another major component.
If I can, Craig McKee from ABC15, you catch him every afternoon, 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock, and the 9 o'clock news as well. Craig, we've seen this happen on the local media stations here based on this national news story. We know that Nexstar and Tegna were interested in a merger. Those two, Nexstar anyway, pulled Jimmy Kimmel off after the errant comments that he made. And we also know that Sinclair has issued editorials that they've instructed their anchors to read in the past. Sinclair also pulled Jimmy Kimmel off for a week as well. I feel comfortable asking you this because ABC15 is not under the ownership of any of those companies. But have you ever in your career experienced pushback from the corporate level where your editorial decisions may have been scrutinized?
No. I've worked for Scripps for coming up to 11 years, and I've worked for then Gannett back in the day. I've worked for other ownerships, Hearst, and there was never a point, at least, and I'm only speaking obviously for my journey in this industry, I have never had any marching orders come down from corporate to local GM down to the newsroom to say you're not going to cover this story. That's not how it works, at least in our local news arena. I can speak now for Scripps Howard. There are other newsrooms that I can't speak about that obviously have had mandatory runs and things of that nature. I'm not going to speak to what they do. I can speak to you about Scripps, and there's not been a time that our CEO sends a message out and says, you're not going to cover this because we have XYZ sales dollars tied to it or some political bias. That doesn't happen within Scripps.
Are there concerns when you see stories like that Sinclair sends out a must-run type of script, or that Nexstar is concerned about their merger and acquisition being approved, and that may have led to some of their decisions about airing Jimmy Kimmel? Carlos, let's go to you.
Yeah, I think it erodes trust, right? People are already cynical when they talk about the media. They say, oh, they don't cover what should be covered. And that only adds more mistrust. And so what you just said about the newsroom and never being pushed to publish anything, I think that's what we need to hear more of, even in the news that we hear today.
And I could say that even in editorial meetings, I mean, a newsroom is made up of a cross-section of the cloth of our America, right? So you have people from varying backgrounds, political views, religions, et cetera. And so you get all of those people into a room. And there are times that those half-hour meetings, editorial meetings, go a little longer because you're trying to vet out, and maybe you have a little debate back and forth. We're speaking on behalf of the viewers, you know.
Expand on that when you say maybe you have a little debate. Does it ever get heated? Do you ever have some personalities that start to clash? And is that something that is welcomed in that room?
I would say over my 28 years, I've seen some heated debates about certain topics. But I think that's healthy in the sense that just like we're speaking here, we can all agree to disagree ultimately at the end of certain topics, right? Do we get a little heated? We're passionate, right? We're passionate about what we believe in. There's obviously a line to that passion, and we want to ultimately come to a point where we go, all right, I've heard your side, you've heard mine. Let's figure out the best way to tell this story now, right?
Yeah.
And sometimes it's like, well, maybe we don't have all the details we need. Let's give it a day, give it a breath, walk out of this room, think about it a little bit, and then come back together. How can we formulate and put this story together the best way for our viewers? And that's really what it comes down to.
Craig McKee, you're hearing from ABC15. And again, you'll be able to watch this on both the KTAR YouTube, the ABC15 YouTube, the streams on both websites and such. And if you don't catch it live, hopefully you're catching this on the replay. Sybil Francis with the Center for the Future of Arizona, excuse me. Let's talk a little bit more about media, the local media, like you talked about. I don't know if you caught this. Arizona Republic has shut down their printing. They're now doing that in Las Vegas. We know that there have been a number of columnists that have recently been encouraged to seek retirement. It is tough. I mean, we have a biannual budget meetings here in our own building. It's tough right now, and I got to tell you, sexy sells, and sometimes sexy means conflict, right? And so let's go back to that revenue question. Do you see a path forward where these companies can continue to thrive while they're competing against those free, very loud voices on TikTok, on YouTube, on these other venues?
I think this goes back to what we were talking about, trust, and really media that speaks to the issues of concern to people in their communities. And it's very clear to us from what we've learned that they really actually don't even care as much about those hot button issues. We persuade ourselves that they do because it's kind of like an echo chamber. But we really find that local communities care more about, do they have enough qualified teachers in their schools? Are we solving, air pollution? Are we solving the immigration problem in a practical way? So I think, this issue of the media and the business model perhaps at the national level, I don't really feel qualified to comment on the national business model. But when I observe local news in Arizona, and the closer they get to the community, the more success there is and the more trust there is. And I think from our perspective as an organization, we're trying to also help not only share this information about who Arizonans are and what they want with elected leaders and candidates for office, but also with the media so that they know what it is that matters to their communities.
And that's something we've done directly at ABC 15. We are reaching out into the community. We want to hear what's going on in these communities. It's not just a flyby when there's something bad going on in your community. Tell us the positive things that are going on. Let us get boots on the ground in your community. Walk the streets in your community. Tell me about what's going on. And I think that is so important to also change that narrative of what is local media? What is local news?
I think it's a great point. Guys, we're headed to this break now. Chris Merrill, Craig McKee hosting KTAR News ABC 15 special, The Right to Disagree, a roundtable discussion. And you've been hearing from Carlos Alfaro from Arizona Talks, Sybil Francis for the Center for the Future of Arizona. Guys, we really appreciate you being here, and I hope to stick around a little bit longer. Carlos, you've been instrumental, and Sybil, as have you, in making this roundtable come together. So thank you so much for your time. We've seen an awful lot of speech on college campuses that has come under fire. You send your kid to college for a degree, you don't send him there for a riot. But when you've got political violence erupting on campus, who's protecting the free speech and who's protecting your child? The battle between ideas and aggression is next in our special presentation of The Right to Disagree on ABC 15 and KTAR News.
In contrast to Democrats asking for more money, he's been trying to make his own solutions.
You know, I have 20 bills of some sorts that would crash or change the price of delivering health care. and the army of lobbyists who walk up and down the hallways who go to war with you just to stop because it's all about the money. Everything's about the money.
You can see the entire interview with Congressman Schweikert, including his thoughts on his candidacy for Arizona governor, at KTAR.com. A West Valley Police Department lobby will no longer be open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Surprise Police Chief Evan Becker says the department's headquarters will now be locked up from 5 p.m. to 7 a.m. The department says the changes are due to an increase in theft in city property and people sleeping there overnight. The change is set to take place November 1st. Residents will still have access to the station via an intercom system outside of the lobby's entrance. Construction about to begin on a long-awaited roundabout at a busy intersection in northeast Tempe.
After years of planning, the project at McKellips Road and College Avenue will finally begin on October 20th. Tempe officials first pitched the project in 2018. It stalled for years due to funding issues, but now they have the cash available to make the intersection safer. They believe a roundabout will calm down busy traffic by discouraging heavy trucks from clogging up the area. The new Tempe roundabout will have one circular lane with 4 exit and entry points. It's set to be ready in February of next year. For more details, go to KTAR.com. Serena O'Sullivan, KTAR News.
And now let's get to the Valley Chevy Dealers Traffic Center for another look at those roads this lunch hour with John Roller.
Thank you very much, Bill. Well, that earlier slowing coming out of the downtown area has improved. Now, we do have some ADOT crews working on the roadways westbound I-10 right near 51st Avenue. It slows down a little bit there, but that earlier heavy slowing has improved a great deal. Main line's not looking too bad. We do have a little bit of slowing on the westbound 10 just south of Sky Harbor as you approach the split. Very normal this time of the afternoon. Camelback east of 43rd Avenue. Look for a collision there with injuries. Elliott Road and the Estrella Parkway, a crash in Goodyear and a crash in the clearing stages downtown 3rd Street and McDowell. John Roller, KTAR News.
Your forecast, lots of sunshine for us this afternoon, a high of 98 degrees today. Clear skies tonight will fall back down to 68 by morning. Mostly sunny tomorrow. We'll see a high of 97. Chances of rain start to slip in later in the week. Just a slight chance on Thursday. Otherwise, partly cloudy skies and a high of 97. Better chance of rain, including some storms on Friday, with a high of 94 degrees. Bright and sunny out there right now. 89 degrees in Glendale. Weather is brought to you by Howard Aaron Plumbing. Whether replace or repair, call Howard Aaron Plumbing. I'm Bill O'Neill on Arizona's news station, KTAR News.
KTAR News 92.3, the KTAR News app, KTAR on YouTube. It's a KTAR News and ABC15 special, The Right to Disagree.
It's a roundtable discussion. I'm Chris Merrill, and co-hosting with me today is Craig McKee from ABC15, afternoon anchor, evening anchor. I don't want to take away any of your credits there, Craig.
It's all good.
You'll catch him at 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock, and 9 o'clock on ABC 15. Joining us in the studio now as we've rotated some of the other high-minded people into the studio with us. Bill Gates, ASU Mechanics of Democracy Laboratory and former county supervisor, joins us in studio. Jane Anderson from the Mormon Women for Ethical Government in here as well. And I wanted to touch on as we're continuing to talk about free speech, meeting some of this political violence, and of course, this entire roundtable was born after the assassination of Charlie Kirk, and we went, this is too much. We've got to talk about this. And so, one of the places that we've seen a lot of tension, sometimes erupting into violence. Sometimes that violence has come from the people on campus. Sometimes it's come from the people enforcing the protests on campus, and that is the different college protests that we've seen, sometimes over the war in Israel, sometimes for other things. And of course, the assassination of Charlie Kirk happened on a college campus. Looking back, you guys, you may be too young to remember the Kent State atrocious, the National Guard at Kent State that went down 1970, Jackson State 1970, a very divisive time politically speaking. And of course, we had the protests here more recently over the Israel-Palestine protests. So when you see what's going on here, let me start with you, Bill. When you see what's happening on college campuses, how do these campuses protect the safety of the students while also allowing for the diversity of opinion to speak freely? But again, free speech that incites treads a very thin line, doesn't it?
Yeah, most definitely. And it's one of the key issues, I think, that university presidents, people in administration in universities and colleges are grappling with right now. I can speak to ASU. which has been, over the years has received accolades for being a place where free speech is encouraged. With my background being a lifelong Republican, sometimes Republicans feel a little outnumbered on campuses.
Sure.
And that's why I appreciate ASU and other universities making sure that it is a true marketplace of ideas, marketplace of voices. As you mentioned, right now in the past few years, we've had particularly, we've had a lot of tensions on university campuses, whether it's related to what's going on in Gaza or other conflicts that we have around the country. And I think there is that fine line, but there has to be a focus on making sure that you're not taking these tragic incidents of violence and using that as an excuse to silence students. We have to allow them to continue to be a marketplace of ideas for students to have that opportunity from the left to the right, knowing that this is where they can use their voices, and frankly having that opportunity as young people to see how to do it right, and maybe sometimes doing it wrong and learning lessons from it.
You talk about learning lessons, though. I mean, the differences between, say, 20, 30, 40 years ago, when you guys were in college, I'm not going to age anyone here, when you were in college and those protests took place, what is your observation now about how protests differ today and when they are shut down? And what is that line?
Well, I think, it's very different, and I know it's going to sound a little cliche, but with social media, it has changed things a lot. I mean, when I was in college, it was the first Iraq War. There just wasn't the same sort of energy on campuses, quite frankly. And I remember our professors talking about, oh, you should have been here during the Vietnam War, right? It was kind of a calmer time. Now there's so much going on. There are a lot of huge issues, both domestically and internationally. And then you tie in social media, which has led to sort of, put gasoline on the fire. And, you have to be careful. And obviously, with the Charlie Kirk assassination, tragic, and that was, everyone has spoken out that was wrong and that never should have happened. But what we do need to learn from this is that, what he was trying to do was encourage free speech. There's so many different groups on campus that are trying to encourage it. The vast majority of university administration is trying to encourage that. So we can't lose that. We need to keep the foot on the floor and continue to have that free speech. I'm someone who believes that the best way you can counter misinformation is with more facts and more free speech. But obviously, once you cross that line, where we have seen on some campuses, unfortunately, there are times when administration has to step in and law enforcement has to step in.
Does that stance change? The countering misinformation with more free speech has always been, a tenet of free speech absolutists. However, we're also in a time right now where we can create misinformation and distribute misinformation faster than any other point in history. Let's go to Jane on that one. Jane, this is a terrifying time right now when all of our information can be spewed out, sometimes hallucinated, sometimes coming from a Russian bot farm, right? And so is there enough free speech to counter the misinformation?
Well, one thing we try to do in Mormon Women for Ethical Government is teach our women about media literacy. And I think that's a critically important skill I would love to see in K-12 education, frankly, but certainly in our college levels. There's going to be, we are not going to control the bot farms. We are not going to control the spread of misinformation, but we can control people's ability to sift through information and discern what is good and not good. Personally, I, try to get my news from a wide array of things that I know are more neutral, things that are left of center, right of center. And that's one way that I can try to make sure that I'm as educated as I can be.
Do you ever find yourself blocking sources that are too far out of that sort of the parameters of left of center, right of center? Do you ever see something that is inflammatory and you say, you know what, I'm not going to turn to that source any longer? I have a few of those blocked on mine, is why I'm asking the question.
Absolutely.
Okay.
I mean, there's things I want to be smart about how I use my time. I'm a mother to 4 children, including 2 with disabilities, so I have limited time. There's certainly, in my opinion, parts of our media that don't serve a purpose, because I think there's a difference between conflict and contention. So conflict is inevitable. You're going to have people that disagree with you and have a different opinion. Contention is a very different animal. It's coming to a point where you believe someone has horrible intentions, that there's absolutely no good that could be seen in the other person. We know conflict is going to happen, so let's figure out how to manage and lean into that conflict so that we can produce better outcomes. But a lot of these media outlets are all about contention. It's all about clickbait. It's all about trying to not really create solutions, but create more attention.
Well, that's part of the literacy aspect that you're talking about. K through 12, a class just on social media literacy would be pretty amazing, actually, because you think about it, the bots and all of the things that are out there, or special groups that their whole goal is to get you fired up, get retweeted, share that information. It's all about, if you read something and it seems inflammatory, the likelihood there's a reason for that, right?
Good chance.
And typical news stories are not going to have that headline or that grab necessarily. We still want you to read that product, for ABC15 and the community, but at the same time, we're not going to have some salacious headline or something. Oh my gosh, did you read this? And you immediately share it out. And that is where they get you. That's where our society as a whole is taking something that is either disinformation or misinformation and immediately sharing it out to their 200 followers, 200 friends. Well, those 200 friends have 200 more friends, and next thing you know, it's a domino
Right,
effect.
and if it comes from somebody who's got 2 million friends,
exactly,
it goes very, very quickly.
Yeah.
Very good. Craig McKee is ABC 15 evening anchor, joining me, Chris Merrill, in the studio as we continue on with our roundtable discussion. Jane, when we come back, Jane Anderson is with the Mormon Women for Ethical Government. Also in the studio with us right now is Bill Gates, ASU Mechanics for Democracy Laboratory and former county commissioner. I'm really curious as we talk about the college speech. I'm curious, Jane, don't answer yet, but this is what I'm going to hit you with when you come back. What role should the government have in determining what are acceptable protests and what the parameters of that are? I'm really interested in your take on that. And then we'll talk a little bit more about that line, conflict and contention. I love that. I called it passion and provocation, but I think we're on the same page. We'll dive a little bit more into that and what rhetoric really is. That is next as we continue our special presentation, The Right to Disagree, with ABC 15 and KTAR News.
Now is a great time to start making smarter money decisions. Dave Ramsey here. Give the outside of your home some much-needed
ABC15 special, The Right to Disagree.
I'm Chris Merrill, your host, along with Craig McKee from ABC15, co-hosting with me here at KTAR News and streaming live on the KTAR News app, KTAR YouTube, as well as ABC15's website, ABC15's YouTube channel. Joining us in the studio right now, Bill Gates, ASU Mechanics of Democracy Laboratories, also a former county supervisor, if you recognize the name. I don't know where else you would know the name Bill Gates from. Jane Anderson is from the Mormon Women for Ethical Government. And Jane, you made mention of being a mom, and your days are very busy, and well, I certainly appreciate that. So when you do see news that you've got, say, protests on campus that are erupting, are becoming, to use your term, maybe contentious, and we did see a little bit of that here at ASU as well during the Israel-Palestine protests that were going on last year. What role is it that you see that the government should have in determining what is acceptable with these protests? We know that government intervention at Kent State is what went downhill. We've seen things happen at Columbia. We've seen them happen at UCLA. We've seen a president who's very determined to stop those things from going on, but it also feels as though enforcement is based on the protester agreeing or disagreeing with the party that may have control of the state or the nation. Where is government's role?
So, right in the name of our organization is ethical government. So we are very concerned about making sure that government plays its proper role. And I am a huge proponent of the power of everyday citizens and about things being really focused locally. So I have huge concerns when a federal administration comes into a state organization and tells it how it should run. I believe that the best decisions are going to be made at the local level. And I am very wary of heavy-handedness in our education spaces. I attended a private university, Brigham Young University. Mm-hmm. We have very specific standards. They are certainly not ones that are held all over. I think we've been voted the most sober campus in the United States year after year after year.
Congratulations.
Yeah. Best chocolate milk, too.
Yeah, so, great.
But, I think every organization should be able to enforce their own standards. And any time with how the wind blows, a federal administration should go into a private university or even a public university and tell them how things should be done. I have huge concerns about that.
So, Jane, I love what you're saying. And Bill, I mean, everything she's saying sounds great, but then we hear about some of these civil rights being infringed upon, where you've got Jewish students who are being harassed on their way to class based on their religion. I mean, this is certainly a civil rights infraction, on the surface anyway. Is that not within the realm of the federal government to step in and say, no, civil rights are protected on a federal level?
Well, absolutely. They do have a civil rights responsibility. But at the same time, we do need to look at this free speech rights. The free speech rights are very significant. And if you're crossing the line, if it's becoming harassment, if it's battery, which unfortunately things like that have occurred, that's a clear line. Physical attacks, things of that sort, there's no place for that. That's when law enforcement has the right to participate. Obviously, hate crimes, anything like that, absolutely unacceptable and should be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. But back to what I was saying before, we have to be careful that because someone is offended, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's a crime. And instead, we should look at creating environments where we are encouraging civil discussions between different parties, discouraging engaging in, racist, anti-Semitic conduct. So there needs to be leadership from the top, and that's throughout government, and that's throughout civil society as well.
When you look at that, though, freedom of speech lately has been kind of blurred. There's been a major discussion on, well, wait, am I going to be shut down or silenced because I'm being vocal about something and somebody else doesn't like it, perhaps in the federal government? And you talk about that leadership, though, when some of the rhetoric, our higher levels of our federal government are out on social media using certain words that some can deem inflammatory, or they're using certain slang words about certain people and certain groups of people, shouldn't leadership be leading on both sides to lead by example of how we should be behaving in society when it comes to these topics?
Oh, my goodness, they should. I don't think that's what we're seeing.
Right.
I was very proud of Utah's Governor Spencer Cox. and how he handled the shooting. The shooting happened just 5 minutes away from where my son's campus is right now. I had many friends that were on campus that day when Charlie Kirk was horrifically assassinated. But the tone and tenor that he took to addressing that was leadership. And the minute that you have individuals who take differences of opinion and use them to spike further polarization, that's not leadership to me at all. There's a great book by Yuval Levin called The American Covenant, and he has this great quote in there that basically says, unity does not mean thinking alike, it means acting together. And so we need leaders that show us what compromise looks like, what listening looks like, what coming together and forging a way forward looks like. And I can tell you that leadership does not look like name calling. It does not look like asking your followers to cut off communication or relationships with people that disagree. And I believe that this really has to start at the smallest levels. I attend a church, if you're not familiar with the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, but we attend church by geography. And so I don't get to choose which congregation is the one I want to go to. I actually attend with the people that happen to geographically live within a certain boundaries. And guess what? That means when I go on Facebook, I can see exactly what the woman next to me said, and I can be like, I cannot believe that you just said that. But there's something beautiful about then attending a service together, both of us serving the primary children at church and having the opportunity to interact where our political identities are not the most important thing. And I think too many political leaders today, they want us to have our political identity be what is most important because it serves them. But I can tell you it does not serve us, and it does not serve Arizona. So when we recognize we are whole people with political differences, that's a whole different ballgame.
You heard from Jane Anderson and Mormon Women for Ethical Government. Bill Gates from the ASU Mechanics of Democracy Laboratory is in studio with us as well. I'm Chris Merrill, Craig McKee from ABC15 as we continue on with our Right to Disagree, a special roundtable discussion. Bill, 1 in 3 college students, recent survey, 1 in 3 college students now say that violence is acceptable to stop a speaker. That seems concerning, especially when we've seen things erupt on college campuses. We talk about leadership. Some would argue that stopping these protests is leadership at whatever cost. If that means we send the National Guard in to break up these encampments, then that's leadership. We've got to do this. And it shows strength of leadership, they might say. When we talk about compromise, finding ways to overcome disagreeable speech with more free speech, some would argue that's weakness. How do you respond to that?
Well, I think strength is creating a great example, right? Being a leader and saying, you know what, we may disagree with the other side, but they're not bad people. We have gotten to the point now where we're demonizing the other side, and I think that's why you have this particular poll showing that 1 in 3 think it's appropriate to use violence to stop someone from speaking. Because if you think the other side is evil, then violence may be justified, but it's obviously not. I mean, I was thinking about this concept just last night. I'm watching Monday Night Football. You know, tough game, fighting it out, trying to win as hard as you possibly can. But what do they do at the end of the game? You see the coaches, the quarterbacks, the players, they're hugging each other after they've just been literally engaged in political violence. And now, as a former elected official, you know, I can tell you, if I had my picture taken as a Republican with the Democrat, I had people saying that I wasn't a good Republican. I mean, this is so out of whack. The days of Burton Barr, the days of Ronald Reagan and Tip O'Neill are far, far behind us. And we've got to get back to that. We've got to stop demonizing the other side. And I think when we do that, the temperature will start to come down a little bit.
Bill, in fairness, though, I mean, as you said, people, they called you a rhino is what they did. And in fairness, some might argue, and not me, I don't get into this political realm. It's certainly not anything I would do to try to, gin up listeners. But they would say that you getting along may have hurt your political career. And they say, look, he wasn't Republican enough for the voters, and so that's why he's not in politics anymore. We've got former Senator Jeff Flake is going to join us the next hour as well. Same argument went with him, too. He was not divisive enough to get reelected. Is the system itself broken?
Well, the incentive structure is broken. Because how do you go and raise millions of dollars across the country as a local elected official, which, by the way, is where the action's at? And I'm not just saying that because I was in local office for 15 years. But the only way you can raise money at that level is by attacking the other side. I mean, I'm not going to name names, but we know people that have been able to achieve that. So the incentive structure has to change. I would agree to that extent that the system is broken, but it is not irretrievably broken. It is not too late. We still have a strong democracy, but it is up to us as leaders, it is up to us as voters to start to look for people who are voting the way that you want to, and maybe not focusing as much as how tough are they, or how do they insult the other side. I would arguably put my voting record up against any other Republican. But maybe my style was wrong. Maybe others think it's wrong. But I'm not going to change. I have to go home to my family at night, and I have to look at our daughters and say, am I proud of what I did? And I am. And if that doesn't cut the mustard anymore, that's one thing. But I don't accept that. I do believe that if people start speaking in a way where we're respecting one another, I think there's an audience out there for it. But people who feel that way, they need to start organizing in support of those candidates. They need to start giving money to those candidates, and then we can start to change his system.
We'll talk about the tipping point in our next segment as we wrap up the first hour. The Right to Disagree, a special roundtable. You've been hearing from Bill Gates, ASU Mechanics of Democracy Laboratory, former county supervisor. Jane Anderson, Mormon Women for Ethical Government. Co-hosting with me is Craig McKee. He is the afternoon and evening host at ABC 15. I'm Chris Merrill, and we'll continue as we're joined by our current Secretary of State, Adrian Fontes, the chairwoman of the Arizona Republican Party, Gina Swoboda, and former Senator Jeff Flake, who was there when we saw actual political violence and shots ring out in Washington, D.C. a few years back. They join us next as we continue our special presentation, The Right to Disagree, on ABC 15 and KTAR News.
authorized Valleywise Health to obtain nearly $900 million in bonds. These bonds would be used for infrastructure and facilities improvements at the Maricopa County Hospital. Dr. Michael White with Valleywise Health joins Arizona's Morning News to explain the boon the funding would provide.
If we don't have facilities, people end up in the emergency departments. And as they stay in the emergency departments, timely access to care continues to increase.
He says that funding cannot be used for hospital operations, only facility improvements. Prop 409 will go in front of voters starting October 8th. Valleywise Health is owned by Maricopa County. Kellen Shover, KTAR News.
Arizona-based semiconductor company Amkor planning to have a new fabrication center up and running fully in 2028 in the city of Peoria. Mayor Jason Beck says it will help ensure Peoria residents have more good jobs that don't require a commute across the valley.
85% of our residents leave the city to work somewhere else. So what I've tried to do since 2001 when I started running was how do we rehome citizens here so they could actually work closer to home and be able to be closer with their families.
It's located in the Peoria Innovation Core. Mayor Beck says the goal is to attract even more tech partners to the area. Chicken corn dogs being recalled from store shelves. Faye Fredericks with our TV partners at ABC15 has the details.
USDA says the corn dogs sold nationwide from Foster Poultry Farms were contaminated with pieces of wood. Companies received several complaints, 5 involved customer injuries. If you have that at home, return it for a refund.
Now, those corn dogs were sold between July 30th of 2024 and August 4th of this year. The USDA's website has additional details on those specific products for you to look out for. On Wall Street, as we get to the closing bell on this Monday afternoon, things in the red. The Dow Jones Industrial Average down 92 points, about 1/4% loss on the day today. The Nasdaq off about 2/3%, down 153 points, and the S&P 500 down 26 points today. For more money news, visit the Business Center at KTAR.com. Now let's get to the Valley Chevy Dealers Traffic Center for a look at what's happening with those roads. We do have a crash involving a pedestrian in Phoenix that's being cleared away right now. This is happening at North 3rd Street and McDowell Road. Grass fire may slow you down as well in Glendale in the area of 99th Avenue and Desert River Boulevard. Otherwise, things moving around the valley pretty nicely for us right now. Your forecast, lots of sunshine. That's what we're going to see for the remainder of our afternoon today. A high of 98 degrees. Clear skies tonight will fall back down to 68 degrees by morning. Mostly sunny skies for your Wednesday, more of the same, a high of 97 degrees. Then things start to change and the rain chances begin to go up for us. We'll see a slight chance of rain on Thursday, otherwise partly cloudy skies and a high of 97 degrees. Then a much better chance of rain, a 40% chance of seeing some precipitation on Friday, with a high of 94 degrees to round out the work week. Right now we have sunny blue skies and 90 degrees in Mesa. Weather is brought to you by Howard Aaron Plumbing. Whether replace or repair, call Howard Aaron Plumbing. I'm Bill O'Neill on Arizona's news station, KTAR News.
KTAR News 92.3, the KTAR News app, KTAR on YouTube. It's a KTAR News and ABC15 special, The Right to Disagree.
I'm Chris Merrill from KTAR News. Joining me is Craig McKee from ABC 15. You'll catch him hosting 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock, and 9 o'clock newscasts on ABC 15. Pleasure having you in here, Craig. You're doing a dynamite job, and I appreciate that. I hope we get to have more of you in here.
I appreciate this conversation today.
Our special roundtable discussion is the right to disagree. In this hour is our current Arizona Secretary of State, Adrian Fontes, chairwoman of the Arizona Republican Party, Gina Swoboda, and from the ASU Institute of Politics, he's also a former ambassador, and I believe he was a senator for a bit, former Senator Jeff Flake, joining us in the studio. It's a pleasure to have all of you in here together, all smiling, very cordial. Let's see if we can fix that. I wanted to start with this, and obviously I saved some of the political conversation to have the politicos in here. We had some other guests that were talking about sort of democracy laboratories and how to bring people together, that sort of thing. I wanted to get your reflection on a couple of people, this time from the right side of the aisle. Shortly after the assassination of Charlie Kirk, there was a columnist. He was the editor-at-large for the Daily Caller. Ingersoll is his name, Jeffrey Ingersoll. And he wrote an opinion column where he explicitly called for violence. He said, "Is this a call for violence? Yes, it explicitly is. I want blood in the streets," he said. "Enough is enough. I choose violence." Let's juxtapose that to what Vivek Ramaswamy just came out and said, being reported by Axios, no more owning the libs. He's pushing for a sharp break from the GOP, saying that we need to have a less controversial tone, not so much in the way of them versus us, but rather fellow citizens, which the majority of Americans that are polled agree. We don't look at our fellow Americans as enemies. We look at them as neighbors. What goes through your mind? Let's start here to my left with Secretary of State Fontes. What goes through your mind when you see someone like Ingersoll who's calling explicitly for violence after we just saw such a violent event?
Well, my first question is, enough of what? He says, we've seen enough. Enough is enough. We need blood. Like, enough of what? We still have spaces just like this where the chair of the Republican Party, a former sitting senator and a sitting Democratic Secretary of State having a conversation. What enough of what? Is this call to violence in a space where we still have the strongest economy in the world. We still have some of the best spaces for people who want to come here and build families and build lives. America is still, I believe, the greatest nation on the planet. We're having a challenging time, but enough of what to be in a space to call for blood? I don't know that question has been answered yet. Like, what is the grievance that is so heinous that he's calling for blood? Or is this an excuse to get clicks and to get attention? Because I asked you right before we got on the air, I'm like, who's this guy?
Yeah.
I've never heard of him. And so I just think that there's this hyperbolic rhetoric out there that is getting to the point of calling for violence, and I'm trying to figure out why. Like, what is it that is so incredibly damaging to the day-to-day lives of average, regular Americans out there? Or is it some made-up existential threat that we're getting kind of rhetoriced into, right? We're getting convinced of. Like, what is it that is so incredibly bad right now in your day-to-day life that makes you think you ought to pick up arms and kill one of your fellow American citizens?
It's a brilliant observation, but I also think it's very intelligent. And not everyone that's going to click on that story is as smart as you saying, wait a minute, why am I doing this? In fact, I think some people are very reactionary. Is there concern, Chairwoman Swoboda, is there concern that people don't dismiss it? Like I think most people in this room saw that and went, well, this is dumb, and then we just simply move on. But an awful lot of people don't. They want to feel that belonging to a very angry group of people.
Yes, I think that's a huge concern, and I don't want to pick on any particular TV station, but there's a viewership model for certain cable stations that has appeared to me over the last decade, and it's getting increasingly worse, that attracts their audience by making them angry, right? And just continuing to feed that rush of betrayal. And then there's no reason involved in that. There's no logical discussion. There's no open discussion about, which is the point of what you're doing here. So I think I am a free speech absolutist, but free speech is not incitement to violence, right? Once you've crossed the line to incitement to violence, you're no longer in the zone of free speech. So I don't know what people are hoping to accomplish other than, as the Secretary said, getting ratings or getting clicks. And it's not useful to the discourse.
And to that point, though, you have a tsunami of information out there, people looking to get those clicks. So for members in our political party, what is your responsibility in Congress and locally in the state of Arizona? What is your responsibility to say, all right, let's cut through this. Let's make sure we're getting the proper information, the truth out about whatever the topic is. Do you have a responsibility on Capitol Hill and of course at the state level here to change this speech that's happening, this dynamic that's happening in our community?
Yeah, I think elected officials in particular have a real responsibility to tone down the volume. I mean, to throw, fire on fire is just that's just not what they're elected to do.
Have you had conversations with members in Congress or people that say, hey, that ad campaign you have out there, that is wrong to be going with that tactic?
It's not just ad campaigns. It's rarely ad campaigns, but just comments and this notion that, after this incident or other incidents, it's usually, trying to paint the perpetrator as they or them instead of, hey, this is an individual who acted on his own. And to try to ascribe it to another broader group just furthers and throws more fuel on the fire. And that's a real problem we had. Karl Rove actually had a good column after that in the Wall Street Journal after some were kind of attributing it to they did this. They did this. He said the proper pronouns here are he, him, not they, them. And I wish that we would do that more, just not ascribe, the worst motives of one person to a particular group.
Right.
And when we do that, it just adds fuel to the fire.
Let me ask you the obvious then, and I'll follow up with the same question that Secretary Fontes just asked. Why? Why are we doing that? Why do we have Mike Lee, who after the shooting in Minnesota called it a nightmare on Waltz Street, mocking Minnesota Governor Tim Walz, calling the shooting a targeted political assassination? He said that certainly wasn't the case, and he said this is what happens when Marxists don't get their way. He's certainly throwing flame on the flame, as you put. Why?
It's clicks, like the Secretary said. I think that most of them just trying to draw attention. They know that will get attention.
But it works.
But the problem is, it does. It gets attention, but the wrong kind, in my view. It just you have a responsibility. We have a representative democracy here. Not everybody is elected and goes to Congress. People do and represent their constituency, and they have a responsibility, in my view, to model better behavior and to tone down the volume and to see that a tragedy like this doesn't explode into something else.
Is there anything, I'm going to ask you personally, former Senator Flake, joining us in the studio as well. Is there anything when you get to Washington, is there ever, from a party conference standpoint, conversations about tone or approach or how to convey the message? Is that ever done on a higher level, or is that left up to the individual?
That's left up to the individual. When you meet as a caucus, typically you're talking about a particular piece of legislation or how to respond to this or that, but that's not really coming from the leadership. And I think that's an individual thing. You're elected to represent your constituency, and you ought to know how to do it. You shouldn't have to be told by your leadership in Washington, to turn down the volume. That's, you ought to know that yourself.
Let me turn to the chair of the Republican Party, Gina Swoboda. You ever tell somebody, look, this is not good for the image of the party right now? This is the way you're talking is not benefiting you or the rest of us?
Yes.
And how did she take it?
I just got lumered, yeah. So possibly me, myself, and I are the target. So here's what I would say. I think that people in the Republican Party feel, at least the people I speak to, like they and their belief systems are being targeted. And then I think we have people in the party on the left who feel the same way, and they're in bubbles and they're not communicating with each other, which is why this is so important. But what appears to have occurred with the brutal assassination of Charlie Kirk, God rest his soul, is there's an individual who feels like their whole being and their whole identity can be negated by the words of another person. And so this is like continuing to escalate because people feel like the words and the thoughts of someone else are literally a threat to their existence, like an existential threat. So if we don't talk more and listen more, I think it'll get worse.
I don't get clicks out of that, though.
No, and look, I think what's really important here is the idea of the opposing view as a necessity for your own personal development. And I think that's one of the reasons. That's one of the reasons why the founders put this nation together and allowed for bodies of debate, Congress and the Senate. These are places where a lot of different ideas come together purposefully. The notion is we have different ideas coming together so that the best ideas will rise to the top. And we have elections so that we aren't committing ourselves to death, but we have a decision point, and then we can change our minds in a couple of years and so forth. The idea is this competition of ideas. That's why the First Amendment is so important. But opposing ideas aren't important just to balance things out. Opposing ideas are important so that we can look, like Jeff and I might disagree on something. My job should be to look carefully at what he is saying in order to analyze my idea and to test my preconceived notions and my perspective to determine whether or not I'm right, to rejudge myself as against what he's talking about. That's the way the group of Enlightenment thinkers that created America wanted us to think about things.
Well, and you represent the people, not a party. You still you get elected from your party, but you're supposed to be representing the people.
But that conversation still, as part of that representation, that's the conversation that we have. So in the legislative branch, it's a lively out there conversation. In the executive branch, we're supposed to run things by talking to the experts.
But some of the optics that come across are that those conversations aren't happening. That it's within the bubble.
No,
even within the legislature, though. But that's the optic that comes out. The perception is that these leaders are staying within their own party to have those discussions, and they're not talking to others.
Look, Craig, I'm talking about the intended ideal of the founders and why it is that we were able to develop the best economy in the world, the best arts and sciences in the world, the best education system in the world, the best legal system in the world, and so forth, the competition of ideas. We've gotten away from that.
Right. The intention is
it's,
good.
It's no longer a test of whether or not your idea or my idea is better. It's a test of whether you or I are the morally uprighteous or the other one is evil.
Mm-hmm.
That's about personal attacks.
How dangerous is that, though, when that conversation is only happening within that one party?
It's incredibly dangerous, and many of us have seen and felt the threats. I mean, it's to where the original question is. You end up getting calls for violence, which are totally unjustified, totally unwarranted, and really confusing to a lot of people.
Right.
You believe in free speech. All of us said this. Gina Swoboda, the chair of the Republican Party, said that she's an absolutist, too. We all believe in democracy in this room. Americans, though, are ready to fight literally for their political beliefs. How far are you willing to go? That's next in our special presentation, The Right to Disagree, on ABC 15 and KTAR News.
The Right to Disagree.
I'm Chris Merrill alongside Craig McKean from ABC 15, and you'll find us streaming on the YouTube channel, both KTAR News YouTube and on ABC 15 YouTube. It's a simulcast YouTube show as well as being on the air live here on KTAR News. Joining us in the studio for our Right to Disagree special roundtable discussion is current Secretary of State Adrienne Fontes, a chairwoman of the Arizona Republican Party, Gina Swoboda, and former U.S. Senator, former ambassador to Turkey. Is it Turkey? I know it's pronounced...
Turkey is how they say it now.
See, there you go. I still didn't get it right. Jeff Flake, now with the ASU Institute of Politics. I wanted to talk a little bit about the free speech right now. Most Americans, according to a recent poll that I saw, published by, I believe, NPR, take it for what that's worth. Who are they? Most Americans think that restricting free speech has gone too far. Now, Gina, you talked about being an absolutist. Do you feel that free speech in America is, in fact, being restricted? And if so, where?
Yes. So here's something. I probably disagree with the Secretary a little bit about the tasks that CISA took upon themselves in the previous cycle. While I understand people's desire to prevent the spread of what they consider to be misinformation or disinformation, I don't think the government should ever be deciding in any way what that marker is. Like, what is the measure of that? Okay. So there was a guy who had a meme who was joking about the day of election day who got prosecuted. There was our current deputy attorney general was censored off of Twitter for things she was saying because she perceived something, I think, to have been related to improper election administration activity. So when that starts to happen, then the people lose faith in the government as a neutral entity that's allowing. We're talking about having the space to exchange ideas and bounce our ideas off each other and make ourselves better by understanding the other person. If the government's intervening into that process and silencing speech in any way, I don't want them to decide what they think is for the better of us to listen to. I'm a Gen Xer, so this whole concept is alien to me, that young people would be afraid that your words are going to harm me. Your words are not going to harm me. The inability to communicate with each other is what's going to lead to harm, and that's where we're going.
I don't disagree with them at all. Americans, however, are increasingly conflating offensive speech with actual harm. That came out of a survey that was done where it found out that 1 in 3 college students say that violence is acceptable to stop a speaker, which I think everyone in this room would agree is not okay.
I think it's really interesting that folks would consider somebody being stopped by a private entity from utilizing that private entity as censorship. That's not censorship. It's only censorship in a violation of the First Amendment rights, which I think we pretty generally believe on if it's a government actor. So if Twitter tells you to shut up, that's not a violation of the Constitution. Now it's Elon Musk and X who's telling you to shut up, not the government. We have to have that distinction, bright line drawn. The other part, though, I think is incredibly important because it is a federal offense to interfere with the operation of an election, to interfere with election officials. And I think the notion that it's just sort of a conversation when someone's purposefully trying to mislead voters and trying to tell voters that you don't vote unless until Wednesday, or you do this other thing that interferes with the voter's constitutional right. That to me isn't just free speech, and you have to have some form of. I think you have to have something behind the notion that interfering with somebody else's constitutional rights intentionally, and again, I would put the evidence really high, like beyond a reasonable doubt, it's got to be intentional, and I would make the burden pretty high for the government to prosecute on something like that. But I do believe that you've got to protect the interest of the voters and their constitutional rights as well. It's a balancing act. And so where you would say absolutist, I think generally speaking we would agree. But any absolutism, in my view, goes too far. And there has to be some space in there. So let's say Chris and Craig got on here and said, look, Election Day is going to be Friday, first Friday of November, and kept telling people that. And people started believing it. That's a real problem because they're getting in the way of those voters' constitutional rights. Now, that all having been said, I think that there may have been a little bit of an overreach from the federal government on this, particularly as it comes to some of that stuff that CISA was engaged in. But at the end of the day, this is a new space because we've never experienced the kinds of attacks against our elections that we experienced back when this was happening. And so is there going to be a ferreting out, an evening of the approach? Is it going to become more reasonable from the government's perspective as time goes on? I hope so. But I also hope that we will continue to be vigilant when it comes to protecting the rights of voters.
Secretary of State Adrian Fontes, you just heard rebutting what the chairwoman of the Republican Party, Gina Swoboda, had to say. I want to turn to former Senator Jeff Flake joining us right now. We all agree that censorship is when the government says it, right?
You bet.
But while that would be a violation of our First Amendment rights, it's still censorship if our employers say we didn't like what you posted online, right? Is there...
That's in a different bucket.
It is in a different bucket. Sure.
As
I could still lose my job, though, right?
Yeah,
and so while I might not be imprisoned, that's still a consequence for me. Are private companies clamping down too much right now, or is protecting their brand ultimately the most important thing for them?
Well, I would think so, and I think we'll feel our way along here. And people will make mistakes. Government will make mistakes. Certainly, private companies will. And the key is to get better every time. And you know, my theory on all of this basically is more speech is better. Routinely, if you're going to err on the side of allowing more speech. Having said that, there are some things that, well, let me just take the responsibility of elected officials again, is on an election issue, for example. It's their responsibility not to sow mistrust in our institutions of government. And that's what was so upsetting in the past couple of years, is to see elected officials who know better sowing mistrust of elections. And because it will benefit them politically. And that just is not right. So in terms of, but that's a responsibility that elected officials ought to have, and I hope the voters will see it as such and reward or punish at the ballot box those who do it right.
Senator Jeff Flake, former Senator Jeff Flake, I should say, Gina Swoboda, the chairwoman of the Arizona Republican Party and the current Secretary of State of the state of Arizona, Adrian Fontes, part of our Right to Disagree special roundtable discussion. I'm Chris Merrill, along with my co-host Craig McKee from ABC15, streaming live on the YouTube channels, both ABC15's and KTAR News. In just a few moments, fuses are getting shorter because this government shutdown is happening, and if you are standing in line at the TSA, you might be thinking enough is enough. Are we just seeing more and more short fuses? And is Washington paying attention to how this is also contributing to an increase in the temperature of the room? That is next as we continue our special presentation, The Right to Disagree, on ABC 15 and KTAR News.
I'm Bill O'Neill. The government shutdown continues as both parties continue to disagree over the fate of tax credits for health insurance marketplace premiums. Republicans say they're willing to negotiate after the government reopens. Congressman Greg Stanton says he's skeptical those would be in good faith after Republicans cut Medicaid funding in the One Big Beautiful Bill. Your closed closet is likely feeling the effects of this year's federal tariffs.
From prom dresses to wedding gowns, formal wear prices are up by as much as 25%. The price of fabric also being impacted, jumping more than 35%. Some supplies are up 50%. Shop owners say they're absorbing costs while relying on repeat customers or even offering payment plans to help shoppers manage those higher prices.
That's Faye Fredericks with our TV partners at ABC15. The Surprise Police Department headquarters, that'll be locked up overnight starting in November.
Surprise Police Chief Evan Becker says the change is an attempt to balance accessibility with security. Starting November 1st, the lobby will be locked nights from 5 p.m. to 7 a.m. The department says the changes are in response to an increase in theft of city property and people sleeping there overnight. A video intercom system will be installed outside the lobby. William Padmore, KTAR News.
The Arizona Attorney General's office has partnered up with 2 state agencies to host a missing persons awareness event coming up this month.
It's called Missing in Arizona, and it's being held October 18th at ASU's Glendale campus. Those who have missing family members are also invited and encouraged to bring any identifiers they can find, DNA samples, medical records, fingerprints, to the officials who are there. It will help the state agencies create a profile and hopefully expedite the case so the missing can be found. Find out more on KTAR.com. LaDonna Harvey, KTAR News.
Now let's get to the Valley Chevy Dealers Traffic Center for a look at what's happening with those roads. Really not a lot out there slowing you down at this point in time. Things moving pretty nicely around the valley. Still may see them cleaning up that grass fire in Glendale, 99th Avenue and Desert River Boulevard. Your forecast this afternoon, lots of sunshine. Will hit a high of 98 degrees today. Clear skies tonight, dropping back down to 68 by morning. Mostly sunny skies for your Wednesday with a high of 97 degrees. Then things start to turn around. Chances of rain moving in. Just a slight chance of seeing some rain on Thursday. Otherwise, partly cloudy skies and a high of 97. Better chance of storms on Friday with a high of 94 degrees. Lots of sunshine out there right now, 90 degrees in Tempe. Weather is brought to you by Howard Aaron Plumbing. With a replace or repair, call Howard Aaron Plumbing. I'm Bill O'Neill on Arizona's news station, KTAR News.
It's a KTAR News and ABC15 special, The Right to Disagree.
Chris Merrill alongside Craig McKee from ABC15 hosting our Right to Disagree special roundtable discussion. Our guests this hour, Adrian Fontes, Arizona Secretary of State, Gina Swoboda, the chairwoman of the Arizona Republican Party, and Jeff Flake from the Arizona Institute of Politics, also former U.S. Senator from Arizona and former ambassador to Turkey.
Turkey's fine.
Turkey. Appreciate you guys being in here. We've got the government shutdown is going on right now, and this while we're early on in this, and we haven't necessarily seen this really feed into the anxiety nationwide yet. The longer it goes on, the more likely it is to do that. That certainly ramps up some of the anxiety that American people are having. Off the air, Gina, I think it was you that said something about necessity is the mother of getting things done, and I appreciated that comment as we talked about how in the early days of Arizona. We had small hamlets and villages, ranches, and mining towns that relied on one another. I'm revealing our off-air conversation, so I hope you guys didn't think that was off the record. They all relied on one another, and it wasn't about my team getting their way. It was about getting something done. Senator Flake, you've been in Washington before. Representative Schweiker just came back and said it is irreparably broken. Do you agree with that assessment?
No.
Okay.
I don't think it is. It's going to be difficult to get out of. And the longer we go and get away from electing people who actually know what regular order is in the Senate and the House, the more difficult it becomes to get back to it. So a lot of people who've been elected in the last decade or so have never really experienced regular order. I think the last time we passed all appropriation bills on time was 1997, before I went to Congress. Wow. So it's been going a long time, but it's certainly gotten worse. I went through several government shutdowns when I was there. It's no fun for anyone. Nobody ought to celebrate it. If you're a limited government conservative, you don't get anything out of it. It's not a money-saving measure. It just is grief to everybody, and just, I think, a pox on all our houses that we can't sit down and get it done.
I mean, 64% of Americans say that they don't believe either side can get along well enough to solve the problems.
Yeah, but that's born of experience. They're watching it, but I don't think it's irreparably broken either.
So what is the solution then? Again, as Chairwoman Swoboda said, necessity is the mother of getting things done. Are they not feeling that there's necessity to accomplish something? Is this a dog and pony show?
Not sufficiently, and it will end, I think, when voters value that and when they elect someone. And I would hope that you have somebody campaign on, hey, I'm going to go back. I am going to work with people on the other side. That used to be the case. You'd advertise that when you.
Well, you hear that in the
office.
campaigns, but sometimes that's not the
Yeah,
result.
you don't
Once
even hear
somebody
much
gets
in
sworn in and they
campaigns
go to
anymore.
Capitol
Yeah.
Hill, I'm not going to say specific names right now because they can't speak on themselves from another state, but I've spoken to some representatives that had that very message. They said, I'm going to Capitol Hill. I've been up there, I visited. They have these huge rooms that have these huge tables that have all these things. They don't need all this. It's all waste. They have this big campaign speech. And then they come back 6 months later and sit down in front of me to do an interview, and I bring up some of those things that they spoke about, and now they have the bullet points. Now they have the messaging that they're supposed to be on target with. How do you change that? If somebody's really going to go to Capitol Hill and change the dynamic and change the tone and change the conversation?
Well, this is a matter of leadership. This is a legislative body. Barry Goldwater, I think all of us would agree, rock rib, conservative, principled. He once said, politics is nothing more than public business. Sometimes you make the best of a mixed bargain. Noting that it's a legislative body. You're not going to get everything you want. And the problem is the longer we go through shutdowns like this, the more entrenched it seemed each side becomes. And I think the key is, in the end, voters have to value productivity in terms of somebody who's going to say, I'm going to go back and actually keep the government open. I'm going to fight for my principles, but recognize in the end this is a legislative body and I'm not going to get everything I want.
But isn't it, Jeff, important that the productivity be for the benefit of the voters? And I think there's a really important distinction between the regular order of business in getting the business done and who's actually going to end up benefiting from the business. And I think the benefit, the perception of the general public is that the regular, quote-unquote regular order of business, in other words, the result of the last several decades of governance, is as against the little guy, is as against the American public. They're not seeing themselves advance. Young people are finding it more difficult to imagine buying a home, starting a family, doing all those things that regular Americans want to do and fulfilling the American dream. So while I agree with you 100% that the process needs to get back to something civil, but as far as the business that gets accomplished, I think we genuinely need to look at this massive, massive growth of the divide between those that have and those that don't have. And it's not a partisan thing, because there's a lot of folks on all sides of the political aisle that are hurting economically. They're hurting and trying to raise their families and, again, trying to get their homes and do the things they need to do. So I agree with you as far as the regular order of being able to get the work done. But I think I'll expand on that a little bit, and it might not have been where you were going, but I think the work needs to be for the American people, and it needs to be for the, just those regular workaday Americans. They need to be seeing more of the benefits of the work of government.
Can I jump in on that? So, because the tagline for the American people caught me. So, the shutdown that we're having right now, in part, is because in the one big beautiful bill, we removed provisions that allowed Medicaid to be given to people with temporary status that the Biden administration had made lawfully present in one form or another, okay? And that vote passed, and then that was done, and now the Democratic Party is saying, we are not going to vote to reopen on a clean bill because we want to remove those provisions and then restore the Medicaid to large groups of people that had heretofore not been covered. And then you also have the issue, like rural hospitals are in trouble. I think we would all agree they're in trouble. We want to help keep them open. It's a necessity for all of the people in the area that are served by them. And my understanding is that the Democratic Party is trying to remove money from the bill. Then you have like the Obamacare subsidy. So these are real issues that are affecting real people, and we need to engage in the debate.
So let's take what you're saying, because obviously you're very passionate about that, as are both sides of this issue.
Yeah.
And if we wanted to debate that, we would see that we've got passionate opinions on what's causing the shutdown. Is compromise a weakness? I've heard this repeated. Compromise is weakness. Compromise is weakness. The other side has been taking advantage of you for too long. If you send me to Washington, to Craig's point, if you send me to Washington, I will not take no for an answer. I will not compromise what you believe to be right.
That is seen as a virtue, no doubt, and we're in a populist moment, I think, in our politics.
Agreed.
Okay. However, I get told all the time, and we've been told for a long time, elections have consequences. Okay. So we had the election. It was very clear what the position was of the party that is now in the majority. We voted through a bill. We had debate. I understand if we're not in regular order. We had the debate as we have come to know it and passed this bill. And I have been listening to the Democratic Party for a long time talk about not hurting the people. What we're talking about right now is people without a voice. The secretary is referring to young people who have, to his point, no even hope of achieving the American dream. They can't even see it.
So if I may,
Yes, please.
what I'm taking from you, though, is that you're saying the Democrats aren't compromising.
Correct.
Right.
Correct.
But in saying that, you're also being very rigid in your own position.
No, because we had the negotiation. Well, so this is where, are we reading each other? Are we listening to each other? We had the debate. We had the election. Now, what is the compromise position? Is the compromise position to increase the spending on the Affordable Care Act, subsidies to the premiums that were supposed to be temporary for COVID, while everybody's yelling that there is no more funding and the country is bankrupt? Is it a compromise to remove a bucket of money to keep the rural hospitals open? I would like it if people would discuss how to get past it, but that shouldn't be part of the shutdown bill. What one party is saying is, let's talk about these issues. Let's try to come to a compromise in regular order after we reopen the government. But if you're holding everyone hostage and you're not having the debate and you're not engaging in the policy at the moment you're supposed to discuss the policy, and you wait to put all this pressure point, it's the American people that suffer.
And what the point I want to make is back to the overall subject here. You were, I think, very correct in describing Gina's position as passionate. But I can tell you here's why we were going to be able to get past this as a nation. And I have the same positive attitude that the ambassador, senator, and I think, what did she call you, the best
Institute
looking guy?
of Politics.
Your wife was out there.
That's my wife.
Gina's
Good looking
passionate. Gina is passionate about the issues, but she doesn't have a passionate hate about me. Even though I'm a Democrat and sitting here as the only Democrat,
Yeah.
she will say the Democrats are X, the Democrats are Y or Z. And that's a little bit of bucket filling. But at the end of the day, I know that this person sitting next to me is a person that I can have a reasonable conversation with, and we can passionately disagree about the issues without being disagreeable towards one another as human beings, as people, as Arizonans, as Americans, because I think she has in her heart the best intentions towards all of us, as do I. We just have different approaches. And if there's anything that we should gain from this general discussion, it's that we can have passionate differences on issues as long as we're not passionately enemies of one another.
Right on.
Right?
Right on.
And I still think you're wrong about
But that
all this.
messaging,
Amen.
that messaging though, I think needs to be repeated as part of this dialogue. This is a great start to this, but there's so many other louder voices out there, louder campaigns or what have you that unfortunately diminish even this conversation today.
We are going to be joined here in just a few moments by a fellow who's certainly dealt with his share of, I suppose, threats. Certainly some people that thought he wasn't the right guy for the job. Stephen Richer is going to join us here in just a few moments, the former Maricopa County recorder who caught all kinds of grief through the last election cycle. And you thought AI was just writing essays and making art, but now it is helping extremists flood your feed with hate. The tech that is supposed to connect us is being used to divide us very violently. And what are we doing about it? That is next in our special presentation, The Right to Disagree. Special thanks, by the way, to the Secretary of State, Adrienne Fontes, for joining us in here. Chairwoman of the Arizona Republican Party, Gina Swoboda. And from the ASU Institute of Politics, former U.S. Senator, former ambassador, and good-looking husband, Jeff Flake. Thank you so much, guys. I'm Chris Merrill. Craig McKee.
Thanks, Chris.
We'll continue here and wrap up our Right to Disagree. Special roundtable discussion next on ABC 15 and KTAR News.
KTAR News and ABC15 Special, The Right to Disagree.
I'm Chris Merrill. Joining me as co-host of Our Right to Disagree is ABC 15 anchor Craig McKee. Craig, thank you so much for spending time with us here today.
Absolutely.
You've been fantastic. So a few years ago, Stephen Richer was the former Maricopa County recorder, and it was a very contentious time. He is no longer the county recorder. He is the senior practice fellow for the American Democracy at Harvard, the Kennedy School's Ash Center for Democratic Governance and Innovation. He takes 2 business cards to hand out his entire title, and we appreciate former recorder Richard joining us right now. Stephen, great to have you on here. I was just seeing that there's a new report warning about extremist groups that are increasingly using AI to intensify, in this case, anti-Semitic propaganda. This is the sort of thing that has to be terrifying when you talk to young people today. They're probably better at sussing out whether or not something is falsified, but in many cases not so much. What does it take for someone to figure out how not to buy into the nonsense?
Yeah, well, I hope you guys have figured out the whole question of how to disagree and how to get good information.
Yeah, we
and
fixed
so
it.
And hopefully yeah, great. Then I just get to clean up and talk about, will the
Perfect.
Diamondbacks be better next season or something like that. But I think the means of delivery and the tools have changed, but the basic nature of our media ecosystem and of sowing hate remains the same. I mean, it's nothing novel that people have found out that if you say inflammatory, extreme things, then you can draw a crowd, you can get some attention. Certainly this has been going on for my whole life. Just AI perhaps supercharges it. And I just just basic media literacy would go a long way in civic knowledge. I wonder who these people are who go to websites like gatewaypundit.com to get their information. And it's just like, it's so striking to me. And I wish we could better help people understand that not all websites are created the same.
I think the media literacy, that becomes a challenge, though, doesn't it? When you're looking at folks who turn to certain online sources and they say, these are my sources. I spoke to a colleague many years ago who was in the news industry, and she had posted something that said XYZ was misinformation. I pushed back on her and said, no, here's the facts. Here's where you can find them. She says, I have my own sources. That's concerning in a world where AI can literally, right now you can put Benjamin Netanyahu riding a horse through downtown Phoenix eating an ice cream cone into AI, and that's what you're going to get. Take that to the extreme part of the conversation, you could really create major political divide and incense an entire community as a result.
Yeah, I would say you're not going to regulate your way out of this situation.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that we tried playing whack-a-mole in the social media world over the last 6 years, where if we saw an inaccurate piece of information, we would flag it for the social media companies, and then social media would evaluate it and take it down. And I think that's just an impossible setup. And so I'm more interested in what is the technology that we can create? Who are the innovators out there who are going to be able to create a product that does more of that automatically, that filters things, that gives you scores, that gives you metrics as far as reliability. And I think there are some such tools. They haven't been widely dispersed and used, but I'm hopeful.
Stephen Richer is a senior practice fellow in American Democracy, Harvard Kennedy School's Ash Center for Democratic Governance and Innovation. You know what? He was just the former Maricopa County recorder. And he's joining us. Yeah. So I love what you're saying, too, about the whack-a-mole, but I would also point out that some of the fact-checking came under scrutiny because people didn't like that their facts were, that it was being fact-checked. In fact, people demanded that they be fed that misinformation. Are there any guardrails that we can reasonably from both sides, and I'm going to use that dirty word compromise again, are there any guardrails that we should be looking at for things like AI to make sure that they are, in fact, a net benefit to society?
Yeah, well, I think we need to get rid of the notion that there's no objective truth. I think in the vast majority of things there are objective truths, and I think that's something we should be striving towards, and I think that we should approach it with a intellectually rigorous, empirical process that, as we would for any types of situation, whether it's medical or whether it's political. And it seems that we've just gotten so lazy and put down our guard in politics and have instead chosen just to go and eat candy all the time, whatever makes us happy at the moment. And so I would say to what many high school civics teachers say is consume a broad array of political sources, look into the origin of your information, look into the motives of the speakers, and that sounds like a lot, but maybe we should just be more mindful in our consumption, even if it doesn't mean we consume on as broad an array.
And I think part of that also is reminding people that you're a consumer. The product you're using, whether it's Facebook or X or any of these other platforms that are out there, you are just a user of that platform. You don't necessarily have rights. If you look at that user agreement, which is usually 800 pages or something, in fine print, the onus that many argue is that these organizations need to be the ones filtering and monitoring this information. But again, to your point, Chris, a moment ago, is those users then start feeling like, well, wait a second, now you're impinging on my freedom of speech. I should have a right to have this information or ingest this information. So who ultimately should be policing when ultimately this is about making money for these platforms?
Right. And so I think we all sort of recognize the absurdity of an individual having to do that for every single news story. But I do think that there is an appetite for that being done. I'm optimistic about Barry Weiss from the Free Press taking over a major news network. And I think that the reason why people were yearning for somebody like that, people are potentially excited for somebody like that, is she brings a level of equanimity, a level of rigor to the news process. And so I hope that her model will prove very economically successful, and it will show that Americans are tired of just the dredge that comes at you from all different angles, and we want real news. And so may that then set off 1,000 flowers that bloom, and we have a news revolution. And I do think that this all gets down to my fight over elections was really not a fight over democracy so much as a fight over truth. And I think that really is the result of a crumbling media ecosystem that we need to rebuild. And I know a lot of people are thinking about that, but I think it's one of the, if not the biggest challenges of our day, one of the biggest challenges.
And I'm not going to speak for Craig here, but I got to tell you, every day I come to work, I'm glad my medium still exists, but I don't know how long that's going to be. I mean, we're competing against podcasters, we're competing against YouTube, we're competing against everybody's blog, vlog, whatever else it might be. It is a very bifurcated ecosystem right now. Do you see that? Do you see a lane that is profitable? I mean, that's the big one here. That's profitable for ratings and revenue for someone who is going to not feed the candy to the people who just want to be fed those same stories that confirm their bias.
All I know is that almost every single news story we read about media as a business is about the decline or about the bankruptcy or about the merger because it didn't have resources anymore. Barry Weiss is one of maybe the only news story who built something from the ground up, and it was required for, I think, $150 million, and they're now running one of the most storied media infrastructures in the United States. And so, and I think that whether or not people feel she achieved it, what her reputation was that we're going to go for straight news. We're going to go for the facts. We're going to ignore the political noise, and we're going to get to the signal. And so that, maybe I'm Pollyannish, but that tells to me that there is still a market for rigorous news reporting that arrives at an objective truth.
Stephen Richer is a senior practice fellow at American Democracy, Harvard Kennedy School, Ash Center for Democratic Governance and Innovation. He's also the name he recognizes, the former Maricopa County Recorder. And Stephen, thank you so much for taking some time with us today. You were dynamite. Really appreciate you being on the program. That's going to do it, Craig, for our Right to Disagree, a special roundtable discussion. I'm glad that Stephen was able to get the conversation about Barry Weiss at CBS News, now overseeing CBS News. If you're unfamiliar, she started a kind of a contrarian website.
Right.
I'm curious to see. It reminds me of when there's a new coach hired for the local sports team.
Right.
And everybody's either he's the worst hire they've ever made or he's the best hire they've ever made. We don't know until it plays out.
Does the
right?
quarterback flame out in the third game, or what happens? It's something we're going to have to monitor. Obviously, if anybody has anything reactionary to this conversation today, craig.mckee@abc15.com. We would love to hear what you have to say about this conversation and potential solutions in your own community and what you're doing to maybe make it a successful conversation.
And also remember, you're going to be able to find this on YouTube, both on the KTAR News channel and on the ABC15 YouTube channel. Special thanks to Arizona Talks, who helped us put together our special round table, and I'm sure it won't be the last time we discuss this. The Right to Disagree, a special round table discussion with ABC15 and KTAR News.
So my mother is thinking of switching from Verizon to Pure Talk, but she's worried the deal sounds too good to be true. Michael, she said, how can those Pure Talk people offer me the same basic service as Verizon for so much less money? I said, Ma, go ask Google how much Verizon spends on advertising and promotions. A few seconds later, my mother said, oh my goodness, $12 billion?